discussion point. Recording is in progress. And I believe the first thing we want to approach is the tax abatement application for Cadillac. And who wants to get us started on that conversation?
I will be presenting on that, and Larry and Jane also. I think all of you, many of you, all of you, have been in preliminary discussions about this in one form or another, whether it was through the informal discussions last week, and then also, Sue, I know you sit in for council on BDC. So, you know, the information, I think, is, I mean, I'll go through it very quickly. The objective of what we want to accomplish today is really to understand if there are challenges in your mind with what we're recommending, any information, additional information that we can be providing during the council session on the 16th, anything we need to either ask the company or ourselves to provide in terms of information on certain areas of focus. Broadly speaking, you know, as you know, the company, Cadillac, in this case, is contemplating a $350 million capital investment in Bloomington, which adds on to the investments they've made since their purchase of Cook Pharmica back in 2017. And they have, as you also know, grown a tremendous number of jobs since then, almost quadruple, or at least triple what they had acquired. And this capital investment comes with 1,000 new jobs. So it is, just to reiterate, it is a significant investment of capital and job growth for Bloomington. If you consider something like the hospital site, which was a major capital investment, really there's not a huge net job growth out of that. It's really a move of jobs, right? And so, I mean, we love the fact that that's happened and all the possibilities that leaves behind and what's happening over there now. But again, in terms, if you look at capital plus jobs, I don't think there's been something like this in this single kind of one-time play that we've seen, at least in the last couple of decades. The site was left behind by Thompson. Cook Pharmica, Cook, and some others invested heavily in that. The city and the city council and the EDC and BIDAC and some of the other plays that we've made have helped to set that up for success. And now we're seeing the fruits of it. So, the probably the biggest curveball here to look at and understand, and we can try to speak to that as much as we can, is that this is the first time the city is employing the ability to go beyond 10 years on a personal property tax abatement. So that was legislation the state introduced in 2014. We've never done it before. The company has expressed serious interest with ensuring that if they make the kind of capital investment that they're talking about, which is about 97% personal property, although mind this 350 million would be a commitment that they're making, and that 1,000 jobs are a commitment, and they have exceeded that in every prior tax abatement commitment, and actual formula. So we believe that this is, if they're willing to make this commitment, that they're probably willing to go beyond this. But anyway, this is the first time that that we've looked at doing something more than 10 years on a tax abatement. They've said that given the nature of their equipment and the tenure of their commitments, and just the nature of their business, that it would be important for them to really protect some of their tax liability, well into the future, which is why we've structured this way. There's been some talk at the state of changing up the personal property tax, rules. There was a bill this year that appears to be dead right now, at least the one was put forward. But there's another House bill that's still in play, which might drop the floor on personal property taxes. And if you know how that works, if I have $100 of new personal property that I'm investing, the first thing that happens is there's a depreciation formula that's placed on top of that. So there's actually what ends up happening is for a gross investment of a personal property of $100, there becomes a net AV that is assessed value on that is the result of the formula. So in year one, for example, it's, I think it's 40%. So right away, the $100 becomes $40 as a result of the net AV adjustment. And then that becomes susceptible to personal property taxation, right? So that's the way that the formula works. We can go into detail during the presentation if you'd like to explain that further. But what happens is at some point that depreciation hits a floor, which is currently at 30%, and the equipment then becomes essentially 30% of its original value into perpetuity. And what the state is considering doing is dropping that floor potentially to 15% or some other amount. So what that means from our perspective is that those taxes would not happen anyway. And so what we're doing in terms of preparing this recommendation for all of you is we're trying to create predictability for the company. The company, this may or may not happen this year. It may or may not happen next year or the year after that. So by having predictability, a company can feel comfortable about making its significant capital investment. And then to some degree, if the state legislature changes the rules, they're going to change for us anyway. But if they don't, then we've created that abatement as part of the local abatement process. So that's why it's kind of important to set this up the way we have. The last thing I would say is if you sort of look at the formula of how the recommendation's set up, it's essentially mimicking a enterprise zone investment deduction because it ends up being roughly 85%. But in this case, it goes 85% past the 10 years. So that's why we set it up as 50% on real estate and 90% on personal property tax abatement to get to that kind of mix formulaically. So, it's a really, really big deal for Bloomington. If it were to happen, I should strongly reiterate that, one of the things about tax abatements, and it is absolutely the case here, is the requirement of a but-for. In other words, that the company is not committing to it unless they are, given a financial benefit that they decide is something that they want to see. So they have not made a decision. We are competing for this investment with other areas in the nation. They have biologics plants, as you'll hear as part of their presentation, around different parts of the country. Bloomington, I think, as they've said in their presentation, I think that stacks up pretty well from a talent perspective, from a quality of life perspective. The site and the adjacent land availability makes us compete well. It is the largest facility in their network. That's good because I think that allows them to, and they've acquired a couple of parcels. I think the couple of areas of interest and concern that we might have is, number one, housing for the workforce and attracting the workforce. If you remember, the hospital site is right up the street. That is going to provide significant housing availability as that gets built out. So I think over the long term, there's going to be increased capacity for housing. So I think that adjacency to that site is actually really interesting for us. Tying their efforts and what they bring into IU and Ivy Tech. So I think there's and in fact, Councilmember Scambolari mentioned this, I think, the other day. But there's they are already tapping IU talent. There's obviously a lot of scientific talent at IU. They're tapping Purdue talent. They're tapping other talent around the region. They're also doing interesting things with Ivy Tech, where they're I sit on the Workforce Region 8 board, and they're doing apprenticeships. This Recover Forward in the city, and thanks to council for this, because it was funding that came through Recover Forward, allowed us to work with them on some life sciences work. So they're tied in at the higher ed, and also I think they're tied in at the high school level. So they're doing already some pretty good cultivation of future talent, which is important to have that kind of pipeline of talent. The wages question, they do pay on average a much higher wage than some of our other sectors, particularly the tourism sector. The range, starts at $19 and it goes up to senior executive, right? So it's all over the map when it comes to it. And I know that some of the questions from last week wanted us to delve into that a little bit more, which we'll try to do. About half their current workforce lives in Monroe County. So, from a county, from an investment or income tax perspective, it's not the entirety of the net. We're projecting something closer to what they're currently experiencing, but there's an upside from that. But their wages, it should be noted that this is very much a very solid wage for our area. It's, we, as you all know, have suffered from stagnant wage growth, or at least somewhat, slower wage growth than the cost of living, and certainly some of the other areas of the state. So this kind of infusion of jobs at this kind of wage level on average is really going to help our community, and has that ripple effect across the community, both positive and negative, right? So, I mean, there's probably a couple of unhappy restaurants out there who may have lost some talent, but on the other hand, this is what happens in the marketplace. And when you get someone driving wages, I think on the whole, that's a good thing. And, and that's what they're doing at the facility. And then finally, sustainability and really them leaning into climate. I think that they have done some interesting things, at least in their current facility. Their LEED Silver, they built their expansion facility as a LEED Silver facility. We have engaged with them on transportation demand management. We are re-engaging with them on that. And I think that they are demonstrating a willingness to be more aggressive on that. We certainly want that to be part of what we continue to talk to them about. And there may be some opportunities for us to do, mode split elements in an MOU, which is something that we want to talk to them about. So, so it's not a pure single occupancy vehicle, transit situation. So we're looking at that. We're working with them on that, and we'll continue to do that. So I think that they have expressed at least an interest and demonstrated a past, behavior that lends itself to being a corporate leader in this respect. And I think, we just need to put that on paper and make sure that that's part of the broader picture that we're trying to accomplish. So I'll just pause there and see if anybody has any questions. I'm happy to delve into details. We can even call up the packet from the EDC if you'd like to see some of the details of what we're proposing. But I'll pause, and I'm really interested in hearing if people have questions.
Yes, thank you, Alex. Anyone from the council have any additional? Yes, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, for the president, and hey, Larry, and hey, Jane. The first thing, and please don't take this the wrong way, but in our discussion with some restaurants losing employees to Catalent, and it's a coined as kind of, that's business. And that's true, but I don't want to discount the other needs of some other parts of the industry, if that makes sense. So I'm not insinuating you did that, but that's kind of the way it sounded a little bit. We're also, Catalent will be taking people from Cook and other biologic businesses, and at least the way I understand it. So that is business, as you say, but I wouldn't, well, that's kind of the way it is. And I know that's not the way you meant it, but okay, that's just a comment. What I'd really like to hear more about is efforts with the workforce pool, and how Catalent, with some of the things we've already heard, how Catalent plans to increase with the workforce pool, and their efforts to make sure they've got sufficient workforce, or trying to do that. And if 0.5% of those anticipated working are in Monroe County, do they have other incentive programs or recruitment programs outside of Monroe County that we're not aware of? Or would that be someone from, say, Greene County that is getting into Catalent through, say, the Ivy Tech program, for an example? And I know that's a little bit in the weeds, and I don't know if I'll need all that, but that'd be nice to know. And the other thing is the $350 million investment, which is, and I will repeat what you said, this is a big deal, and I'm happy that it's before us. But the $350 million investment, And obviously, if the council does tax abatement on personal property and real estate, 190%, 150%, there is a cost, and that cost is the revenue we would forego. So I would like a comparison there somehow, like a rate of return thing maybe. And I know that's not exact, but I think that'd be more transparent for the public, is that ultimately this is kind of what it could cost the city, but the public good is everything that is generating for the city. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And let me probe into that. And I can speak to a couple of the different things you've raised if you'd like me to today, or at least, or perhaps you're putting them forward as really suggestions for the presentation. The rate of return question that I have for you is this, which is, I mean, I think everybody realizes that there is no return if there is no investment, right? So just for starters.
Correct.
So it's not like, well, what if we had a lower tax abatement? Wouldn't we get more money? Because I mean, you know, that's a dangerous game to play. But there are different elements of the rate of return, which include things like, you know, folding in the COIT, for example, into the net gain from the, you know, real estate property taxes against, you know,
Yes.
what would have happened. Is that what you're thinking about?
Exactly, but I was looking more at highlighting the public good based on the investment, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I think,
you know,
I think
not taking away one or the other and all, you know, but what is the ultimate public good?
Yeah.
That this action that the council may consider.
Right.
Yeah,
And
I think it's significant.
yeah,
I really think. Okay, and I'm done. Thank you.
if I could just add to that, I mean, that's the one thing that we always have to weigh and measure is the public benefit to allowing this investment and this, in a sense, a gift to a major corporation. And one of the things that I'm looking for is good corporate citizenship. They mentioned that they like being here because of the talent pool and the quality of life here, but what is Catalent willing to give us back in return for enhancing the quality of life? And of course, that is good jobs with good wages. We get that. But also what makes quality of life in a community is more than just good jobs. It's having great schools, it's having great quality of life, it's having those kinds of other economic development drivers that I would want to make sure that Catalent addresses. And I know they did some of that in their earlier presentations and talking about how they're supporting a diversity of their workforce. But I would like to know if they have any other ideas. I know Cook has been a major contributor to the city of Bloomington in many ways through their philanthropy work and real estate efforts. So that's the kind of thing that I think the public wants to know. What are we getting back for especially a 20-year tax abatement as opposed to a 10-year? So.
Yep. Okay, that's great feedback. Thank you to both of you with that.
Anybody else from council have any? Yeah, Sue.
Yes, thank you for kind of getting us oriented and setting this up for us. Some questions I have, Alex, when you do the full-blown presentation, could you talk more about the larger context of Catalent's relationship with Bloomington? So what have they requested of us in the past in the way of tax abatements? What have we offered? What have we given? What have they promised in terms of job creation and what have they delivered? Things like that.
Yep.
Okay. Also, I'm interested more in the projected job creation. You said 1,000 new jobs, average wages of 30. If you could dig into that a little more when you present and let us know how many jobs are we thinking at $19 an hour? How many jobs are we thinking at $30 an hour? I realize we have to do some in aggregate, but I'd appreciate more detail there. And then I think you said that 95% of the abatement was applied to personal property. Is that correct?
Well, what I said was 97% of the capital investment is personal property capital investment.
Okay. I'd be interested in knowing more about that property. I know just enough about monoclonal antibodies to be dangerous. But I'm interested. I guess what I'm saying is teach me more about the instrumentation that they're acquiring. What is its lifespan? Are there ways of repurposing it? Is it a one purpose kind of item that we're purchasing? Things like that. But if you could just teach me about if that's the biggest chunk by far of their investment, I'd like to learn more about that.
And to be clear, I should not be the one teaching you that, but I will. I'll see if they-
Well, like I said, I know just enough about monoclonal antibodies to be dangerous. So I'm done. That's what I have for now. Thanks.
Thank you.
great.
Anyone else from council have any questions? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yeah, so I mean, I would like to see the details, but we don't need to spend time on that now. What I was wondering, and I didn't quite follow, Alex, when you were talking about the depreciation and the legislation currently in the State House, where the depreciation floor may go from 30% to 15%. I didn't quite understand what impact that may or may not have on our incentive package. So if you could clarify that either today or later.
I'm happy to do that now, unless you want me to just flag that. You know, I can give you the short version right now. Basically, what happens is, you know, it gets taxed at the same rate as real estate taxes, right? So there's an AV there's an increased assessed value. It gets formulated through slightly different, I think, money flow, if I'm not mistaken. But so what happens is really more often than not, when you have a lot of embedded personal property and you bring in new, it sometimes just hits the floor immediately. So it comes in at 30. So even that depreciation may not happen. But regardless of whether it's in the midst of depreciation or it just hits the floor, $100, let's say it's a 30% floor, $100 of gross personal property purchase becomes $30 of assessed value and against 2.0669% tax rate, right? So that's the formula, and then we get that tax revenue. But if $100, if the floor drops, it becomes $100. Let's say it goes to 15%. $100 becomes $15 of net assessed value, and that becomes susceptible to the tax rate. And so you've lost essentially you know, half the value of the taxable assessed value. And that, if that happens at the state, that's going to happen regardless to us, right? So we don't really have a role in that. But one of the reasons, to their credit, the state is hesitating on doing it is because they realize that it's going to have a negative impact on local revenues. So the Senate is not very interested in pursuing it. The House keeps wanting to do it. I think the Senate's maybe not. So anyway, it's in flux right now. There's a possibility of something happening this year. They've talked about it for years. It hasn't happened. And it may or may not happen this year, and it may or may not happen next year or some other period. But the uncertainty of that is what we're able to have an effect on, because what we're effectively doing is, you know, protecting their exposure. And to some degree, from our perspective, if that drops, the value that is represented by our having abated that value is gone anyway, right? So for us, there's no downside. It's all up. I mean, you know, it's all downside, I should say. We lose the revenue either way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess it would help to see the table of, you know, how much tax is abated each year of the, is it 20 years? 20
Yeah. So what I will do is we have a table, and we will have that for you, and we can send it. In fact, it's part of the EDC, and I'll just send around even the EDC packet. You could see it in there. What it is, you see the total gross personal property investment, you see the depreciation schedule that's applied to it, then you see the discount, and you see what the values of all of that look like. I think that was in the table chain. If not, we have models that have formulated all that out. We even have looked at what happens if it goes to, you know, 15%. So
okay,
we have a sense of that. We can speak to it clearly. We've modeled it out, but certainly can show that to you so you can understand that.
thank you.
All right, Councilmember Smith, did you have a question?
Yeah, I for the presentation, first of all, I think this is just a fantastic opportunity, and we should do everything we can to encourage them to do this project in Bloomington for sure. I think when we listen to Catalent, yeah, if you show the tables, the abatement tables, I think that's really good and really helpful. I would ask if in your presentation or in Catalent's presentation, if there's any mention of their philanthropic activities, somewhat what Susan was talking about earlier too. I think that's really great. I think it just can help demonstrate to the public other advantages besides just that, they have, floor of $19 an hour. But they've must have done some philanthropic things over the years, and probably anything that highlights that or shows that is just another feather in their cap. And I want to thank you all for the presentation and for informing us about this project. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions from council members or for anyone else related to this particular presentation? Seeing no more hands up. Alex, something else?
So I just wanted to make sure everybody was grounded on process, right? So what happens in a tax abatement, for those of you who haven't gone through this yet, I think everybody has, but maybe not. What happens with the tax abatement is there are actually two steps that have to happen. You designate an economic revitalization area, which allows for tax abatement to occur, and then you vote on the tax abatement recommendation, right? So there's sort of a double, and then there's a period, there's a kind of wait time, public interval, and then there's a at the end, which is currently scheduled, Stephen, if I'm not mistaken, for March 2nd. There is what's called a confirmatory resolution. So it's kind of a 1.5 step process, right? The upfront has two components to it, and then you've got that backside. So just to prepare you, the 16th will be that first step, and then the confirmatory is what happens, and it would be what happens depending on what the vote is in the beginning of March.
And just to clarify a little bit, when Alex says wait time or cooling off period, it's a public notice period. Nicole's going to be all over this, but once that first resolution, if it's passed by you all, we have to put out public notice, because that second meeting, it requires a public hearing so that you can receive remonstrance or objections to the abatement. So the public is invited explicitly to come and give those at that second confirmatory meeting.
Right. And we've already discussed this with Nicole in her office about, it's a little bit of a tight turnaround time, but we can do it with proper thinking ahead. So.
And thank you for your support on that. Yep.
Right. Any further questions for anyone? Again, just touching on what I said about good corporate citizenship. And I don't know if Jen, you and Clark could maybe kind of add to this discussion. I mean, I'm seeing a lot about states that are trying to lower taxes in order to be a good economic development strategy. And I'm seeing more evidence that actually it's the quality of life in a community, that some of the things that I mentioned before about, good amenities, including good public schools, that sometimes is more of a draw for corporations to come to a state or stay in a state. And so I don't know if you've done any of that research or looked at any of that research, but I'm not saying that tax abatements are not a proper tool. I certainly think they are. I've supported abatements in the past, but I just want to make sure too that it's not just, the money that's keeping people in our community, but they want to be here because they like the community and they want to be a good corporate citizen of the community. So I don't know if there's anything you could bring to bear to that discussion.
Yeah, I'd be happy to comment on that. And so when we are either talking to local employers that are expanding or employers that may wish to relocate here, it's all part of a conversation together. So a company can't locate somewhere unless it has, both the buildings, the land, the people, the talent, the other amenities, and able to be successful in that community. But then they also have to be able to make the budgets work as well. And so that's where both of these things come to the table. These questions always come up. So when they're initially looking at a community, we do get a lot of questions about what's your education system like? What is your workforce like, et cetera. And then once they've kind of honed in on a couple of communities that they may wish to locate to or expand in, that's when you get into the nitty gritty where you're talking about a lot of these questions.
Right. And again, we don't have mountains and we don't have ocean views, but Bloomington has to have other things that make people want to live here, work here, go to school here, all that good stuff. So yeah, I'm sure you do look at things from a broad lens. So thank you for that. All right. If there are no further questions from council, we appreciate this, Alex and Jane and Larry. Thank you.
Thank you for your time today.
All right, next, we're going to hear about the resolution coming forward on this council sidewalk committee. So Isabel, are you ready to speak to that?
Sure, I can speak to that. This is a resolution that Kate Rosenbarger and I are bringing forward. And the general idea is, okay, well, let me back up a little bit. I think the problem we're trying to address is that there's a perception among some in the community that political considerations come into play when we allocate sidewalk funds. Whether or not that's true, that there's a perception out there. And the resolution is to basically do away with the council members' direct involvement in choosing sidewalk projects, but rather we would approve a set of criteria, which city staff would then apply to determine which projects get funded in a given year. So it's kind of like the council's role would be kind of like with CDBG funds, where we get a proposal and we would have a presentation from staff, and then we would vote yes or no on that proposal. The funds would remain with the council budget, so that wouldn't change. I think it's a good time to do this because the planning and transportation staff, especially Mallory Rickbile, spent a lot of time in the fall enhancing the criteria to consider socioeconomic equity and racial equity factors. From talking to Ron as chair of transportation and to Kate, who was on that committee, there seemed to be general agreement among committee members that the new criteria are solid, and they approved what the staff recommended this time around. So this would just take out the sidewalk committee. Basically, it would leave it in the hands of staff to bring forward a proposal that the full council would vote on.
All right, thank you for that. Any questions regarding this resolution from fellow council members here in the room? Yes, Ron.
Thank you. And thanks, Isabel, for working on this. Yeah, the criteria is really great. Mallory did a great job. The question that I would ask was, who in the community is believing that there's political considerations? Who are those folks, and the reason why I asked that question is they should look at the criteria or contact me or Mallory and look at that, just because that was a reason why we spent 6 months working on the criteria, to take a lot of the political considerations out of it. So who is there a contingent or people that are, bending your ear about it, that I need to know who they are to try to give them information?
No, I was speaking in very general terms. And I think it's kind of came about because of the publicity that Mark Stossberg's study from late 2020 had on the B Square Beacon and other outlets. So no, I don't have a particular, interest group or neighborhood group that's been talking to me about it. I think it's only natural that members of the sidewalk committee who represent council districts would focus in on projects in their district. I mean, I would do that probably if I was, you know, on that committee. So I think just taking that possible sway out of it, that possible, sorry, I'm not finding my words very well, but that consideration out of the mix and saying, okay, we have these great criteria that we all agree on, which would be an addendum to the resolution, and let the staff apply them. It's similar to what we did about a year ago with the traffic calming program, the neighborhood traffic calming program. We,
Right.
you know, got the whole proposal, we looked through it, it made sense, and then we said, okay, you can run with this. Except that in this case, the money would still stay in the council budget, we would allocate.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And I'm glad you mentioned Mr. Stossberg's report. You know, it was great and all. I do think that he's pushing his own agenda that, and I respect his intelligence and his work on that, but sometimes I think he's a little bit too pushy. There, I had my say. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from council have any questions? Sue?
Yes, thanks. Thanks for bringing this, Isabel. A couple of questions that I'll have in my mind. Is there anything else besides this general public perception prompting the need for a resolution? Is there anything inherently flawed in the sidewalk committee's process or anything like that? Do you envision that the proposal coming from staff would be amendable? In other words, would it just be an up or down vote on what's presented to us by staff, or could it be amended by council? And what would that look like? How would that process unfold? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So as far as other problems with the way it's currently run, I would just mention the staff time that's involved and the time of council members, frankly. But I mean, looking at the meeting minutes from the December Transportation Committee meeting, you know, there are like 9 staff members on there, and so it takes a lot of staff time to review all these projects with council members. And as far as amending a proposal that comes forward from staff, I'm not sure how that would work, but that's something that I can talk further with Stephen Lucas about, and with Kate, and we have a meeting on Monday with members of Planning Transportation, I think Scott Robinson and Beth Rosenbarger. So we can, you know, kind of discuss that and see.
Okay. Yeah,
I don't know how that would work.
Today, but as you were talking, I was thinking about how that could work. So the other thing
I guess I would urge my colleagues to carefully look at the criteria and the proposal that'll be part of this. And, you know, if there are any considerations that are not in there that could lead to an outcome that you would disagree with, then let's talk about that.
Okay. And also, and I'm also pushing administration to produce these numbers too, but there are a lot of different pots of money that beget sidewalks in Bloomington. I mean, there's the money afforded to the sidewalk committee right now, but there's also RDC money, and there's project money, and there's some state money, and so forth and so on. And I realize it's a slippery number. I realize it can be hard to say, well, that's just kind of bundled into a larger project, you know. But I'm interested in how much money in total we spend, or the best estimate we can get, how much money we spend in total on that, on sidewalks in, say, a given year, and how much of that is currently the responsibility of the sidewalk committee. What percentage of that is actually overseen by this committee as it's currently structured? Because I'm trying to get a sense of how much, if indeed this committee has sway, exactly how much sway does it have? Does it have sway over 60% of the money? Does it have sway over 2% of the money? You know, so I think we need to figure. Does that make sense? And
yeah, absolutely. And I had a conversation with Scott Robinson about this, and I think it is hard to put a dollar figure with that, because it sounded from my dialogue with him that other than the council sidewalk committee funds, other funds that are expended on sidewalks are really dependent on bigger projects. You know, they either come from money from the state or federal level through the MPO, or they are, you know, go along with CBU projects or other things. And so it's hard to say what's an average year, but I will try to get that information
it's
because
not
I do
an
think
easy
it's
one.
interesting.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're working on it. So,
And if I can just,
yeah,
I'm gonna comment that it each year that percentage, Sue, is just going to be different. I think last year it was approximately 50% of the total, somewhere, you know, plus or minus a little bit. But other years, if there's a large project through the MPO, it could be much less. And I think year to year, you could probably calculate it.
sure. I think the overall, I think most of us are comfortable with the notion that the overall answer is it varies. Okay. And I get that. But again, I'm trying, you know, if we were to give up or discontinue a sidewalk committee, what are we giving up? Let's figure out how much influence is actually there. And is it as much as we think it is, you know? So let's sort that out. And yeah, I totally realize that it varies. So,
Yep.
but yeah.
Sue, if I could just follow up, what do you mean, how much influence are we giving up? Can you unpack that a little bit for me?
One of the things that I think about with this process is that we have some very good criteria in place that were created over months, okay? Those criteria can be used by staff, and they are used by staff. They can also be used by a sidewalk committee, okay? The fundamental difference between staff and the sidewalk committee is that staff don't report to constituents, and we do. So staff.
Well, they do indirectly.
And indirectly, I think, is the key word. Okay. By virtue of having to be in regular touch with our constituents all the time, we might understand nuances to projects that aren't necessarily reflected on a matrix or aren't necessarily reflected on a spreadsheet. And I do think there's value in that, to be honest. So if we give that up, if we are controlling 99% of all sidewalk money in Bloomington, that's probably, yeah, I'm inclined to agree that we need to dial back council's influence on that and let planning take over. If our portion of the money that's given to sidewalk committee is fairly small, then my thinking is a little bit different. Does that make sense at all? I don't feel like I'm being very articulate.
No, I understand what you mean.
Okay, so
yeah, that reminds me of one other kind of plug for for letting the staff do it, and that is that they are more plugged into our overarching plans, like our transportation plan and what the high priority network is for bicycles and pedestrians. So that's just one other thing. Of course, we can look at
and I think that's duly noted, and that's important too. So, but
yeah,
just those are some of the things that I'm juggling with in my head as I think about this. So I'm done. I took up too much time.
That's fine.
Jim, did you have a question?
Thank you. Yeah, and I think the staff's knowledge of all these projects, coupled with council members on the sidewalk committee, is the joy of that setup. So I will just say that. But one of the things is we've been working on these criteria for a while, and I'd say updated criteria. And here recently, many of the aspects of Mr. Stossberg's report were incorporated, and I think via Ms. Rickbile, have been incorporated as part of that. And I think one of the driving forces of considering and even adopting, if that's a proper word, some of the points in Mr. Stossberg's report, along with some of the other things, was intended to dissuade the perception, if there was one. And I think the perceptions weren't totally true in totality anyway. But I thought the updating of the criteria, adding Mr. Stossberg's report from an equity standpoint, was to help undo or eliminate the perception of undue council member influence. So, and I'd like to know what you think, Councilmember Piedmont Smith and others, on why those updated criteria that we've talked about and are established now is not doing the job to get rid of that perception. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
It's kind of like Councilmember Scambola who kind of Councilmember Smith, who said where are and what are. Well, that's a little bit difficult, I think, to know exactly. But I guess I'd like to know the volume of that perception, if there's a way to do that. Yes, I'm aware of that. I'm just not so sure how large it is or how much it influences the work of the council members that's on this sidewalk committee, along with staff. And Beth Rosenberger worked really, even before I think Ms. Rickbile did some things. So this has been a work in progress for a while. And before you respond, I do want to thank you as well for bringing this forward. So thank you. At least we can discuss it and move forward. So thank you. Did that make sense? I'm sorry.
Yeah. I think I understand what you're getting
Okay.
at. Since we have the new criteria, you're asking, doesn't that address the perception of political influence?
Well, I'm
No?
not so sure address is the word, but has it, address, I guess, or dissuade that perception. And also there's other things too, and not to cut you off at all, but one of the reasons that the sidewalk committee did partner with utilities and the street department is kind of to combine the resources and get a bigger bang for the buck. So those are some of the reasons for some of those projects, as opposed to what some of the perceptions may be. And I do think that has been addressed, but I'd like to know what you or staff or anyone else thinks about that as well.
May I respond now?
I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. I mean, yes, go ahead. Thank you.
The council sidewalk committee can override any items that may come to the top of the list as a result of the application of the objective criteria. And so that's where I see a problem. And I guess I'll just say outright, I see that as a possible political conflict of interest. I don't know how many people in the public see that, but I see that as a potential political conflict of interest. And it's not to single out any of my colleagues. Like I said, if I was on that committee, I'd probably be homing in on District 5 sidewalks too. But I don't think we should be. I don't think that just having these new criteria, which are excellent, and I really appreciate all of the time that Mallory and Beth and the committee put into them. I don't think just having those criteria and keeping the 4 council members as a committee addresses the full problem as I see it. And the problem as I see it, and initially I phrased it as the public sees this problem, and I think there are people in the public, but let me just speak for myself now. The problem is that there could be political reasons why some projects are moved up. And I don't think those kind of reasons should enter into it. Certainly the working together with CBU to address, opportunities where they may be doing some work in a project and could, at the same time, create a new sidewalk, that certainly will still happen, would still happen if it was just up to staff, even easier probably, because they would just have a direct tie then with their CBU colleagues. So does that answer your question at this point?
Might be worth discussing further, actually, as
Sure.
we flesh it out. But thank you very much. It does beg the question, and I know this is maybe an unnecessary comment, but if district reps would kind of lean toward their district, I guess I'm wondering where that would put us at large folks. that have served on the sidewalk committee. But that's just me thinking out loud. So, and thank you for your response. Now go
Yeah,
ahead.
I guess one other thing I would say is that you know, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So residents of the city of Bloomington who know how to contact their council members, who have the time to send us photos of sidewalk problems, to have the time to call and advocate, are just one portion of the population that we represent. And I'm always cognizant that there are a lot of residents who do not have the time or do not know who to contact and just live with, you know, dangerous situations where they walk on South Walnut Street or whatever without a sidewalk because, you know, they don't have the bandwidth to go and try to advocate for this. So I always have to, you know, sure, there's a sidewalk maybe on South Downs that needs replacing, but there's also a sidewalk on West 3rd Street that people who are guests of the homeless shelter need, you know, and those people are not going to call me. So, you know, that's another way in which I think it might be best to remove council members from that decision making.
Well,
Thank you.
just regarding that, and that's an interesting proposition you bring up, Jim, about at-large members serving on this as opposed, if there's any sense of impropriety that there's pork involved, which I frankly don't believe that to be the case. It's been a long time since I've served on the sidewalk committee, but when I did, I was always struck by the fact that there was already a formula in place. I understand that has been vastly improved over the last year or so with the respect to concerns about underserved populations. But in my going through that exercise, there was always a very long queue of possibilities. And because of the fact that in Bloomington, we have to retrofit so much because so many neighborhoods were built up without any sidewalks at all, that it's a big job of catch up. And a lot of the criteria had to do with walkability standards. Where were some of the major places that people needed to walk to and where were the gaps? And then we had to incrementally fill those gaps. Now, maybe it was because my approach was at large. We always took in consideration, I mean, everybody probably wants sidewalks, but we don't have the funding on a yearly basis to put sidewalks everywhere where they're needed. So you had a formula into walkability, proximity to schools, proximity to major employment centers, proximity to, you know, various things that went into the decisions as to when those decisions were going to be made about the small amount of money that the sidewalk committee had in order to fill in some of those gaps. I never felt that any of and I did serve on the committee with several people who were district reps, that they were putting their district ahead of that formula that had already been put in place. So that's just something to consider going forward. I don't know if things have changed significantly since the time I served on that committee. And then I'm also wondering, because I don't recall there being 9 representatives from planning and transportation in the room with us when we were making those decisions. There clearly were several that were in there helping to advise us, but not 9. So what caused that increase in staff? That would be my question.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to jump in there again. I think the last few times there was still a discussion of and a further explanation of the way the new criteria was being implemented. So I think there was a lot more staff the last few meetings.
Okay, but that isn't typically the case, that you have to have that many advisors in the room with elected officials trying to make these decisions about the
Correct.
sidewalk allocations. Okay.
Correct.
All right. Thank you. All right. Anybody else have anything else? We're getting close to our hour here. Isabel, anything more you need to add before?
No, but feel free to email me if you think of other questions or concerns you have, and I'd like to try to take those into account, and I'll relay to Kate what we discussed today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Is there any other business that we need to attend to, Mr. Lucas, before we say goodbye?
Not that I have. So thank you all for attending. I've taken notes on your questions. So I think that's all I've got for today.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you all. Stay safe out there. I know it's still a bundle up cold snow day and be careful out there.
Yep.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much. See ya.
If there's any volunteers to do my driveway, let me know.
No.
Have a good day, all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.